Blood pooled on the wooden floor of the Republic, Washington General Store, where Delilah Carter stood frozen, staring at the crimson spreading from beneath her stepfather's body, as the sheriff wrote something in his notebook about justifiable homicide. The year was 1883, and women who defended themselves against drunken violence were still looked at sideways, even when the law said they had the right. Her hands trembled as she set down the iron skillet that had connected with Samuel Carter's temple when he came at her with his belt for the last time, the crack of impact still echoing in her ears like a gunshot she could not unhear. The sheriff, a portly man named Higgins, cleared his throat and told her she was free to go, that no charges would be filed given the circumstances, and the testimony of Mrs. Pemberton next door who had heard the shouting. Delilah nodded numbly, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins, her green eyes vacant as she walked past the growing crowd of onlookers who whispered behind their hands. She had nowhere to go. The small room above the store had been her prison for 3 years since her mother died of consumption, and now it felt like a tomb she could not bear to enter. She walked through the muddy streets of Republic with her worn boots splashing through puddles left by the morning rain, past the saloon where piano music tinkled through the swinging doors, past the blacksmith shop where sparks flew like angry fireflies. The town sat in the northeastern corner of Washington Territory, surrounded by pine forests and mountains that seemed to press in on all sides, making the world feel smaller than it was. Gold had been discovered in the area recently, bringing prospectors and drifters and men with hard eyes and harder hands, turning what had been a quiet logging community into something rawer, more dangerous. Delilah found herself at the edge of town, where a small boarding house stood, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who had come west with her husband during the railroad construction years. The woman took one look at Delilah's face and ushered her inside without asking questions, leading her to a small but clean room on the second floor. When Mrs. Chen closed the door behind her, Delilah shook violently, her whole body convulsing with the weight of what had happened, the terror she had held back flooding through her like a dam breaking. She could not stay in that room. The walls pressed in, the closed door making her feel trapped, suffocated. She yanked it open and left it that way, standing in the doorway gulping air until Mrs. Chen came back upstairs and found her there, pale as milk. "You need rest, dear," the older woman said gently, her accent still carrying traces of Cantonese mixed with frontier English. "I cannot have the door closed," Delilah whispered. "I cannot breathe when it is closed." Mrs. Chen studied her with knowing eyes, then nodded. "Leave it open then. No one will bother you here." But Delilah could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Samuel's face twisted in rage, felt the impact of the skillet in her hands, heard the terrible sound of skull meeting iron. She sat by the window instead, watching the street below as darkness fell and lanterns were lit in windows across town. That was when she first saw him. He rode down the main street on a gray gelding, tall in the saddle with a worn brown hat pulled low over his face. Even from her second-story window, she could see the confident way he sat his horse, the way he moved with the animal rather than against it. He dismounted outside the saloon, tied his horse to the rail, and stretched his back like a man who had been riding for days. When he tilted his head back, she caught a glimpse of his face in the lamplight, strong-jawed and sun-weathered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. He went into the saloon, and Delilah turned away from the window, feeling foolish for staring. What did she care about some drifter passing through town? She had bigger concerns, like figuring out how she was going to survive now that Samuel was dead, and the store would likely be sold to pay his debts. She must have dozed eventually, because she woke to the sound of boots on the stairs. Her door was still open, as she had left it, and she could see into the hallway where Mrs. Chen was leading someone to the room across from hers. It was the cowboy from earlier, she realized, recognizing his profile and the way he moved with an easy grace despite his obvious exhaustion. "This is the only room I have available," Mrs. Chen was saying. "Clean sheets, basin for washing, and breakfast comes with the price." "Sounds fine, madam," he replied, his voice a low rumble with a hint of somewhere southern in it, maybe Texas or Oklahoma territory. "I appreciate the accommodation." He paid Mrs. Chen from a small leather pouch, then carried his saddlebags into the room. Delilah watched through her open doorway, unable to look away. When he set down his bags and started to close his door, he paused, catching sight of her watching him. Their eyes met across the narrow hallway. For a moment neither of them moved. His eyes were dark, almost black in the dim light, and there was something in them that made Delilah's breath catch. Not threat, not the predatory look she had grown accustomed to from men, but something else. Recognition, maybe. Understanding. He touched the brim of his hat in a small gesture of acknowledgement, then deliberately left his door open before turning away to unpack his belongings. Delilah stared at that open door across the hall, her heart beating faster for reasons she could not name. She pulled her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and finally lay down on her narrow bed, her eyes still fixed on that rectangle of light spilling from his room into the hallway. That night, for the first time since her mother died, she slept. When she woke to pale morning light filtering through her window, she heard movement across the hall. She sat up, pushing her tangled hair back from her face, and saw the cowboy emerging from his room. He was dressed already, his shirt clean but worn, his gun belt sitting low on his hips. He caught her looking again and gave her a small nod before heading downstairs. Delilah rose and washed her face in the basin Mrs. Chen had provided, then braided her hair as neatly as she could manage without a proper mirror. She owned only 2 dresses, and the one she had worn yesterday was stained with blood, so she changed into the other, a faded blue calico that had been her mother's. It hung loose on her frame since she had lost weight in the past year, Samuel's meanness having stolen her appetite more often than not. When she made her way downstairs, she found Mrs. Chen serving breakfast in the small dining room. There were 3 other boarders besides herself and the cowboy, 2 miners who spoke to each other in what sounded like Swedish, and an older gentleman who read a newspaper while he ate. The cowboy sat at the far end of the table, working his way through a plate of eggs and bacon with the focused attention of a man who had gone too long without a proper meal. Delilah took a seat as far from the men as possible, old habits making her want to be invisible. Mrs. Chen brought her a plate without being asked, giving her shoulder a gentle squeeze as she set it down. The food smelled wonderful, but Delilah's stomach was tight with anxiety about what came next. She had no money, no family, no prospects. Samuel had made sure she had no friends in town, isolating her systematically after her mother passed. "You are Delilah Carter," the older gentleman said suddenly, lowering his newspaper. "I heard about what happened yesterday. Terrible business." Delilah's hand shook as she reached for her fork. "Yes, sir." Samuel Carter was known to be a difficult man, the gentleman continued, ignoring the sharp look Mrs. Chen gave him. "I am Mr. Thornton, the town clerk. I wanted you to know that the store will be inventoried and sold, but there are personal effects that belong to you and your late mother. You have every right to claim them." "I have nowhere to put them," Delilah said quietly. "Keep your room here as long as you need," Mrs. Chen interjected firmly. We will figure something out." The cowboy had stopped eating and was listening to the conversation, though he kept his eyes on his plate. Delilah felt his attention like a physical thing, warm and solid across the table. "I will need work," Delilah said, forcing herself to speak up despite her fear. "I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I can read and write and do figures. I worked in the store for 3 years, so I know how to manage inventory and deal with customers." Mr. Thornton nodded thoughtfully. "I will ask around. In a town this size, word travels fast. Someone will need help." But word traveled both ways, and Delilah knew that her reputation was now complicated. She was the woman who had killed a man, even if it was ruled justifiable. Some would see her as dangerous, others as weak. Neither perception would make finding work easy. After breakfast, she helped Mrs. Chen clear the dishes, grateful to have something to do with her hands. The cowboy lingered in the dining room, drinking a second cup of coffee and watching the street through the window. When the other boarders had left, he finally spoke. "Name is Isaac Reynolds," he said, still not looking directly at her. "I could not help but overhear your situation." Delilah's hand stilled in the dishwater. "I am managing Mr. Reynolds. I am sure you are." He turned to face her then, his dark eyes steady and calm. "I am looking to buy some land outside of town, start a horse ranch. Republic is growing, and there will be demand for good working animals. I will need help getting started, someone who can handle the business side of things while I focus on the horses." Delilah stared at him, not quite believing what she was hearing. "You are offering me work." "I am offering you a partnership of sorts," Isaac said carefully. "I have money saved from years of working cattle drives and ranch jobs across Montana and Wyoming. I know horses, know how to break them and train them. But I am not good with numbers and accounting, and I cannot be in 2 places at once. You would handle the business operations, keep the books, manage supplies and sales. In return, you would receive a percentage of the profits and a place to live on the property." "You do not know me," Delilah said, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you offer this to a stranger?" Isaac was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "I know what it looks like when someone is trapped," he said finally. "I know what it looks like when they fight their way out. That takes strength, Miss Carter. That is the kind of person I want as a partner." Mrs. Chen had stopped pretending not to listen and was watching the exchange with shrewd eyes. "Isaac Reynolds has been staying here for a week," she said to Delilah. "He is a good man, pays on time, causes no trouble, but you do not have to decide anything right now." "I would like to accept," Delilah said, the words tumbling out before she could overthink them. "But I need to know that this is a legitimate business arrangement. I will not be anyone's kept woman or servant." "You have my word that this is purely business," Isaac said, meeting her eyes directly. "We would draw up a proper contract with Mr. Thornton as witness. Everything legal and above board. You would have your own quarters, separate from mine. The work would be hard, especially at the start, but it would be honest, and the rewards would be shared fairly." Delilah felt something unfurl in her chest, something that might have been hope if she allowed herself to believe in such things. "Then yes, Mr. Reynolds, I accept your offer." They spent the next week making arrangements. Isaac had already identified a property he wanted to buy. 200 acres of good grazing land about 5 miles from town, with a creek running through it, and an old cabin that needed work but had good bones. Mr. Thornton drew up the papers for both the land purchase and the partnership agreement, ensuring that Delilah's stake was legally documented. Some of the townspeople raised eyebrows at the arrangement, but Republic was still frontier enough that unconventional partnerships were not completely unusual, and Mrs. Chen's vocal support helped quiet some of the gossip. Every night during that week, Isaac left his door open across the hall from Delilah's. She never asked him why, and he never explained, but she understood that he had noticed her fear of closed doors and was offering her the comfort of knowing she was not sealed away, not trapped. It was a small gesture, but it meant more to her than she had words to express. She found herself watching him when she thought he would not notice, studying the way he moved with deliberate care, never making sudden movements, always announcing his presence with a cleared throat or a soft word before entering a room where she was. He was being careful with her, she realized, making sure she never felt cornered or threatened. The understanding made her throat tight with emotion. On the day they were set to move to the property, Delilah claimed her mother's belongings from the store's inventory. There was not much, just a trunk of clothes and linens, a few books, her mother's wedding ring, and a silver brush that had been a gift from Delilah's father before he died when she was a child. She packed everything carefully, running her fingers over the worn spines of the books, and remembering her mother reading to her by lamplight before Samuel entered their lives and ruined everything. Isaac had purchased a wagon and team for hauling supplies, and he loaded Delilah's trunk alongside lumber, tools, food stores, and everything else they would need to make the cabin livable. They set out mid-morning, with Isaac driving the wagon and Delilah sitting beside him on the bench seat, her hands folded in her lap. The road out of town was rough, more of a track than a proper road, winding through tall pines and across meadows where wildflowers bloomed in purple and yellow profusion. The September air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine sap and earth. Delilah found herself breathing deeper than she had in years, as though she had forgotten how to really fill her lungs. "It is beautiful," she said softly, looking at the mountains rising in the distance. "It is," Isaac agreed. "I have been from Texas to Montana, and this is some of the finest country I have seen. Good water, good grass, not too harsh in winter. A man could build something lasting here." "A man and a woman," Delilah corrected gently. "This is our venture, Mr. Reynolds." He glanced at her, and she caught the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth. "You are right, Miss Carter. Our venture." The cabin came into view as they crested a small rise, and Delilah felt her breath catch for the second time that day. It sat in a clearing beside the creek, built of squared logs with a stone chimney and a covered porch. The roof needed repair and the windows wanted glass, but the structure was sound. Beyond the cabin, the land rolled away in gentle waves, perfect for horses to graze and run. "What do you think?" Isaac asked, pulling the wagon to a stop. "I think it is the most wonderful thing I have ever seen," Delilah said honestly. They spent the rest of the day unloading the wagon and assessing what needed to be done. The cabin had 2 rooms, a main living area with a fireplace and a smaller back room that had probably been used for storage. Isaac had already purchased a wood stove that sat in pieces in the wagon bed, along with 2 narrow beds, a table and chairs. "I will sleep in the main room," Isaac said as they stood in the cabin looking around. "You can have the back room for privacy. We will need to build a proper barn and bunkhouse eventually, but this will do for now." The back room had a door, and Delilah felt her chest tighten at the sight of it. Isaac noticed her reaction immediately. "We can take the door off if you prefer," he said quietly. "Or I can fix it so it does not latch, just swings free." "I do not want to be difficult," Delilah started, but Isaac shook his head. "You are not being difficult. You are stating your needs, and I am accommodating them. That is how partnership works." He removed the door from its hinges that very afternoon, leaning it against the outside wall of the cabin. Delilah helped him set up her bed in the small room, arranging her mother's trunk at the foot of it, and placing the silver brush on the windowsill where it caught the light. That night, they ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread cooked over the fireplace, sitting on the porch steps and watching the sun set behind the mountains. The sky turned gold and pink and purple, colors so vivid they seemed painted on. Somewhere in the forest, an owl called out and the creek babbled its endless song. "I want to thank you," Delilah said into the comfortable silence, "for giving me this chance, for treating me with respect." Isaac was quiet for a moment, staring out at the darkening landscape. "My mother was in a situation like yours once," he said finally. "My father drank, and when he drank, he got mean. She stayed because she had nowhere else to go, no way to support herself and me. Then one day my father got thrown from a horse and broke his neck. My mother said it was the hand of God, and maybe it was. But I remember how she looked before he died, like she was just waiting for the world to end. I swore I would never make a woman feel that way, and I would help when I could if I saw someone in that kind of trouble." "I am sorry about your mother," Delilah said softly. "Is she still living?" "She passed 5 years ago, fever took her, but she had some good years after my father died, found some peace. I like to think she would approve of this." He gestured around at the property, the cabin, the vast open space. "I think she would," Delilah said. They fell into silence again, but it was not awkward. Delilah realized with some surprise that she felt comfortable here, sitting beside this man she barely knew, in a place that was about as far from civilization as one could get. For the first time in longer than she could remember, she felt safe. The work began in earnest the next day. Isaac started repairs on the cabin roof while Delilah inventoried their supplies and started setting up a system for tracking expenses and income. She created ledgers using paper and a pencil Isaac had purchased, her neat handwriting filling the columns with meticulous precision. In the afternoons, she helped Isaac with the physical labor, handing him tools, holding boards steady while he hammered. They worked well together, she discovered. Isaac was patient and methodical, never rushing but always making progress. He explained what he was doing and why, teaching her about building and repair without condescension. When she made suggestions, he listened and often implemented them. The mutual respect they showed each other felt revolutionary to Delilah, who had spent years being dismissed and degraded. At the end of the first week, Isaac rode into town to meet with a horse trader he had contacted by telegram. He returned with 3 mares and a young stallion, all with good bloodlines and sound conformation. Delilah helped him settle the horses into a temporary corral he had built, watching the way he moved among the animals with calm confidence. "They are beautiful," she said, admiring the stallion's sleek coat and intelligent eyes. "They are the foundation," Isaac said. "With these 4 and careful breeding, we can build a reputation for quality horses. It will take time, but we will get there." Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Isaac worked with the horses each morning, beginning the patient process of training and conditioning. Delilah managed the household and business affairs, making trips into town for supplies and gradually building relationships with merchants and potential customers. She discovered that she had a talent for salesmanship, a way of presenting their operation as professional and reliable that inspired confidence. Every evening, they ate dinner together and talked about the day's progress. Isaac would tell her about the horse's training, and she would update him on the financial situation and upcoming appointments. Sometimes, they just sat in companionable silence, listening to the night sounds and watching the stars emerge overhead. Isaac never closed the door to his sleeping area, a gesture Delilah knew he maintained for her benefit. On cold nights, she would wake and see the glow of the banked fire in the main room, visible through her open doorway, and the sight comforted her more than she wanted to admit. She found herself thinking about Isaac more than was probably appropriate for a business partner. She noticed the way his hands moved when he worked with the horses, gentle and sure. She noticed the sound of his laugh, rare but genuine, when something amused him. She noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention, an expression in his dark eyes that made her heart beat faster. But she pushed those thoughts away, reminding herself that Isaac had offered her a business arrangement, nothing more. He had shown her nothing but respect and propriety, and she would not complicate matters by developing feelings that were not returned. She had her independence and her security, and that was more than she had dared hope for a few months ago. Winter arrived in November, bringing snow that blanketed the property in white and made the creek sing a different song as ice formed along its edges. They had prepared well, with food stored and enough firewood split to last until spring. The horses grew thick winter coats and stayed healthy despite the cold. Delilah and Isaac spent more time inside during the worst weather, working on tack repair and business planning by lamplight. The close quarters should have felt awkward, but instead, Delilah found herself cherishing the intimacy of shared space and shared work. They began trading stories about their pasts, filling in the details of their lives before they met. Isaac told her about growing up in Texas, learning to ride before he could properly walk, working his first cattle drive at 14. He spoke of the vast distances and the hard men who had taught him the trade, the storms and stampedes and river crossings that had tested his courage and skill. He had drifted north after his mother died, working ranches in Colorado and Wyoming and Montana, always saving his wages and learning everything he could about horses and land management. Delilah shared memories of her childhood in Oregon, where her father had been a schoolteacher before consumption took him when she was 8. Her mother had moved them to Washington Territory to be near her sister, but the sister had died in childbirth before they arrived, leaving them stranded. Her mother had married Samuel out of desperation, not knowing what kind of man he truly was until it was too late. "She tried to protect me," Delilah said quietly one evening as they sat by the fire. "But she was so weak from her own sickness, and he knew it. After she died, there was no one to stand between him and me." Isaac's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just reached out and gently squeezed her hand. It was the first time he had touched her beyond helping her up into the wagon or handing her something, and the contact sent warmth flooding through her. "You are safe now," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I promise you that, Delilah. You are safe here." She believed him, which was perhaps the most remarkable thing. Delilah had learned not to trust promises from men, but something in Isaac's steady presence made her feel that his word was solid as the mountains surrounding them. Christmas came, and they marked it quietly with a special meal and small gifts. Delilah had knitted Isaac a scarf from wool she had purchased in town, working on it in secret during the hours he spent with the horses. Isaac gave her a beautiful leather-bound journal, the pages blank and waiting to be filled. "For your writing," he said as she ran her fingers over the smooth cover. "Mrs. Chen mentioned that you used to write stories before, well, before things got difficult. I thought maybe you would like to start again." Delilah felt tears prick her eyes. She had not written anything creative in years, Samuel having burned her pages when he found them, calling her foolish for wasting time on such nonsense. "Thank you," she whispered. "This is the most thoughtful gift I have ever received." That night, after Isaac had banked the fire and settled into his bed in the main room, Delilah lay awake with the journal pressed to her chest, feeling something shift inside her. She was falling in love with Isaac Reynolds, she realized. Not the desperate, dependent love her mother had felt for Samuel, born of need and fear. This was different, built on respect and partnership, and the quiet joy of shared days and mutual purpose. But she did not know if he felt the same, and she was terrified of ruining what they had built by speaking feelings that might not be welcome. Winter deepened, and with it came a new routine. One particularly fierce night in January, a blizzard howled around the cabin with such force that the walls trembled. Delilah woke in the darkness, disoriented and afraid, the wind sounding like voices screaming. She stumbled out of her room, her heart pounding, and found Isaac already up and feeding the fire. "It is just wind," he said gently when he saw her frightened expression. "The cabin is solid. We are safe." But Delilah was shaking, memories of Samuel's rages mixing with the storm's fury in her mind. Isaac guided her to a chair near the fire and draped a blanket around her shoulders, then sat beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his solid presence. "Tell me something good," she said, her voice trembling. "Tell me about your favorite horse or your favorite place or anything that is not about fear." So Isaac talked, his low voice steady and calming, telling her about a Palomino mare he had worked with in Montana, the smartest horse he had ever known. He told her about watching the sunrise from a ridge in Wyoming, the whole world spread out below him painted in gold. He told her about the first time he had seen the ocean, on a trip to San Francisco to deliver horses, and how the vastness of it had made him understand how small he was and how large the world was. Delilah listened, her breathing slowing, her panic receding. At some point, she leaned against Isaac's shoulder and he did not move away, just kept talking until the words became a soft murmur, and she drifted into sleep. She woke at dawn still in the chair, but Isaac had moved her at some point so she was lying down with pillows under her head and extra blankets piled on top of her. He was already up, making coffee and checking that the horses had weathered the storm safely. When he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, he found her sitting up and looking embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said. "I did not mean to fall apart like that." "You did not fall apart," Isaac said firmly. "You had a moment of fear, which is a natural human response." "There is no shame in that, Delilah." The way he said her name, soft and full of care, made her heart ache with longing. Spring arrived slowly, the snow melting in gradual stages, the creek swelling with runoff, the first green shoots appearing in the meadows. The mares were all pregnant, due to foal in late spring, and Isaac was excited about the coming additions to their herd. Business was picking up as word spread about their operation, and Delilah had bookings for several horses to be trained over the summer months. One warm afternoon in April, as Delilah worked in the garden plot she had started near the cabin, she looked up to see Isaac watching her from across the yard. The expression on his face was unguarded, full of such tender longing that it took her breath away. When he realized she had caught him looking, he did not turn away embarrassed. Instead, he set down the rope he had been coiling and walked toward her with purpose. "Delilah," he said, stopping at the edge of the garden, "I need to talk to you about something." Her heart began to race, but this time it was not from fear. "All right." Isaac removed his hat and turned it in his hands, a gesture she had learned meant he was working up to something difficult. "This partnership we have, it has been the best thing that ever happened to me. Working with you, building this place together, it has given me a purpose and a home I never thought I would have." "I feel the same," Delilah said softly. "But I find myself wanting more," Isaac continued, his dark eyes meeting hers. "I know that was not part of our agreement, and I understand if you do not feel the same way. I will never push you or make you uncomfortable. But I would be lying if I did not tell you that somewhere along the way, this stopped being just business for me. I care about you, Delilah. I love you." The words hung in the air between them, fragile and precious. Delilah stood slowly, dirt on her hands and her hair coming loose from its braid, and took a step toward him. "I love you too," she said, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. "I have for months now, but I did not know if you felt the same. I did not want to assume or hope for something that might not be real." Isaac's face transformed with joy, and he closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned through hard work. "May I kiss you?" he asked, and the fact that he asked permission made Delilah love him even more. "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, soft and sweet and full of promise. The kiss was everything Delilah had dreamed about and nothing like she had feared. There was no demand in it, no possession, just the meeting of 2 people who had found something rare and wanted to cherish it. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I want to marry you," Isaac said, still holding her face in his hands. "I want to build a life with you, not just a business. I want to wake up every morning knowing that we belong to each other by choice, not circumstance. Will you marry me, Delilah Carter?" "Yes," Delilah said, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Yes, Isaac Reynolds, I will marry you." They married in June in a simple ceremony at the small church in Republic, with Mrs. Chen and Mr. Thornton standing as witnesses. Delilah wore a new dress of pale yellow that Isaac had commissioned from the town seamstress, and she carried wildflowers picked from their own meadow. Isaac wore a new suit that made him look handsomely uncomfortable, tugging at his collar until Delilah laughingly told him to stop before he damaged it. The ceremony was brief, the vows traditional, but when Isaac slid a gold band onto Delilah's finger and kissed her as his wife, she felt the past finally release its hold on her. She was no longer defined by what had been done to her, but by what she chose to create. They held a small reception at the boarding house, Mrs. Chen having prepared a feast that seemed impossible given the limited kitchen facilities. Half the town showed up, more out of curiosity than affection, but Delilah did not care. She was too happy to worry about what people thought. When they returned to the ranch that evening, Isaac carried her over the threshold of the cabin, both of them laughing at the awkwardness of it. He set her down gently in the main room, and they stood looking at each other with sudden shyness. "I had the door to the bedroom rehung," Isaac said quietly, "but I want you to know that it will never be locked. You can come and go as you please, and if you ever want it removed again, just say the word. Your comfort and safety matter more than any convention." Delilah felt her eyes fill with tears for what seemed like the 100th time that day. "Can we leave it open tonight?" she asked. "Just for tonight, until I get used to sharing a room." "We can leave it open every night for the rest of our lives if that is what you need," Isaac said, pulling her close. "I meant what I said, Delilah. You are safe with me, always." They left the door open that night, and for many nights after, but gradually Delilah found that she did not need it open anymore. The act of closing the door became a choice rather than a trap, and knowing she had that choice made all the difference. The night she reached out and closed it herself for the first time, Isaac understood the significance of the gesture and pulled her into his arms with a tenderness that made her heart ache with joy. Their first year of marriage was filled with hard work and deep happiness. The mares foaled successfully, producing strong, healthy babies that promised well for the future of their breeding program. Delilah managed the business side of the operation with skill, negotiating contracts and managing their growing reputation. Isaac trained horses with patience and expertise, developing methods that were kinder than the harsh breaking techniques many cowboys used, producing animals that were willing partners rather than broken spirits. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of shared life. Delilah learned that Isaac snored softly when he slept on his back, but was silent as a cat when he slept on his side. Isaac learned that Delilah loved her coffee strong and dark, and that she hummed while she worked, often without realizing she was doing it. They learned how to argue fairly, how to apologize sincerely, how to forgive quickly. In the fall, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but waited to be certain before telling Isaac. When she finally shared the news one evening over dinner, he sat perfectly still for a long moment, then stood and pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. "We are going to be parents," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "We are," Delilah confirmed, her own voice shaking. "Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Isaac said, pulling back to look at her face. "Are you? I know your mother's death was from consumption, but childbirth is dangerous too. Are you frightened?" "A little," Delilah admitted. "But mostly I am excited. I want this baby, Isaac. I want our family." They spent the winter preparing for the baby's arrival. Isaac built a cradle from cedar wood, sanding it smooth and carving a pattern of horses along the sides. Delilah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands working the soft fabric with love and anticipation. Mrs. Chen visited regularly as Delilah's pregnancy progressed, bringing supplies and advice and her reassuring presence. The baby came in April 1885, during a spring rainstorm that drummed on the cabin roof like 1,000 fingers. The labor was long and difficult, with Mrs. Chen attending and Isaac pacing outside in the rain because Delilah had insisted he not see her in such a state. But when the baby's first cry split the air, Isaac burst through the door, propriety forgotten, and found his wife exhausted but glowing and holding a red-faced, squalling infant. "A boy," Mrs. Chen announced with satisfaction. "Strong lungs, good color, all the right parts in all the right places." Isaac sat beside Delilah on the bed, looking down at their son with wonder. "He is perfect," he said softly. "You are amazing. Look what you did." They named him James, after Delilah's father, with the middle name of Samuel, which shocked her until Isaac explained that he wanted to reclaim the name, to give it new meaning through a child who would know only love and support, never violence or cruelty. Delilah understood and agreed, appreciating the poetry of it. Parenthood changed them in ways both expected and surprising. Delilah discovered a fierceness in herself when it came to protecting James, a mama bear instinct that would have terrified her if it did not feel so right. Isaac proved to be a natural father, patient and playful, rocking James through fussy nights and making silly faces to coax out baby smiles. The ranch continued to grow. They hired their first employee, a young man named Thomas who had a way with horses and needed work after his father's farm failed. Thomas built himself a small cabin on the property and became part of their extended family, eating meals with them and playing with James, who adored him. When James was 2, Delilah became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier and the delivery faster, producing a daughter they named Elizabeth, after Isaac's mother. Beth, as they called her, had her father's dark eyes and her mother's auburn hair, and she was a peaceful baby who seemed content to simply observe the world around her. The years passed in a blur of growth and change. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. Beth proved to have her mother's head for numbers and organization, lining up her dolls in neat rows and keeping her corner of the cabin meticulously tidy even as a small child. 2 more children followed, another boy they named Daniel and a girl they named Sarah, completing their family. The ranch prospered beyond their initial dreams. Reynolds' horses became known throughout Washington Territory and beyond for quality animals and ethical training. They expanded their holdings, purchasing adjacent land as it became available, building a proper barn and bunkhouse, and hiring more employees. Delilah managed an operation that employed a dozen people and had customers from California to Montana. Republic grew too, transforming from a rough mining and logging town into a more established community. A railroad spur was built, making shipping horses easier. Schools were established, churches built, proper roads laid. Delilah and Isaac became respected members of the community, known for their fair dealing and their kindness to employees and neighbors. But through all the success and growth, they never forgot where they started. Every year on the anniversary of the day they met, Isaac would tell Delilah the story of seeing her in that window, looking so lost and so brave, and knowing that he had to help her if he could. Delilah would tell him about watching him ride into town, something in his bearing calling to her even when she was too broken to believe in rescue. "We saved each other," Isaac would always say, and Delilah would always agree. The ritual of the open door became family legend. As the children grew old enough to understand, Delilah told them age-appropriate versions of her story, wanting them to understand that their mother had been through darkness, but had found her way to light. She wanted them to know that fear could be overcome, that trauma did not have to define you, that safety and love were possible even after terrible things. "Your father kept his door open for me when I needed to know I was not trapped," she would tell them. That is what love looks like. Noticing what someone needs and providing it without them having to ask. Respect and kindness every single day. Isaac taught the children the same lessons through his actions, showing them how to be gentle with frightened animals, how to earn trust through patience, how strength and kindness were not opposites, but complements. He taught James and Daniel how to work hard and treat people fairly. He taught Beth and Sarah that women were just as capable as men, just as valuable, just as deserving of respect and opportunity. As the children entered their teenage years, the ranch faced new challenges. A drought struck in 1895, lasting 2 hard years and testing their water resources and feed supplies. They survived through careful management and the goodwill they had built with neighbors, everyone helping each other through the difficult times. A fire destroyed the main barn in 1897, started by lightning, but no animals were killed and the community came together to help rebuild. Through every challenge, Delilah and Isaac faced it together, their partnership as strong as ever. They still talked every evening, sharing the day's events and planning for the future. They still laughed together, teased each other, found joy in small things. The passion of their early days had settled into something deeper and more enduring, the kind of love that did not need grand gestures, because it was woven into every ordinary moment. When James turned 18 in 1903, he announced that he wanted to stay on the ranch and eventually take over the operation. Isaac and Delilah were thrilled, but made sure he understood the responsibility and the work involved. James proved himself more than capable, bringing fresh ideas while respecting the foundation his parents had built. Beth surprised everyone by declaring her intention to become a teacher, following in her grandfather's footsteps, though she had never met him. She attended normal school in Spokane and returned to Republic to teach at the newly built schoolhouse, becoming beloved by her students and respected by the community. Daniel developed a passion for veterinary medicine after helping Isaac treat a horse with a difficult injury. He apprenticed with the town veterinarian and eventually took over the practice, providing care for animals throughout the region and working closely with the ranch. Sarah, The youngest and wildest of the children fell in love with a rancher's son from Montana and married him at 20, moving away but visiting often and starting her own family on a cattle ranch outside Billings. As their children built their own lives, Delilah and Isaac found themselves with more time to simply enjoy each other's company. They took long rides through the property, watching the land they had cultivated and protected. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over the mountains. They traveled occasionally, visiting Sarah in Montana or taking trips to Seattle to see the growing city. One evening in the spring of 1910, as they sat together watching their grandchildren play in the meadow beyond the cabin, Delilah turned to Isaac with a contemplative expression. "You ever think about how different our lives could have been?" she asked. "If you had not come to Republic when you did, or if you had not offered me that partnership?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, his weathered hand warm around hers. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But then I remember that I was looking for you, even if I did not know it. I was searching for a place to belong, a purpose beyond just surviving. You gave me that. We gave that to each other." "I was so broken when we met," Delilah said softly. "I did not think I could ever feel safe again, let alone happy." "You were not broken," Isaac corrected gently. "You were wounded, but there is a difference. Broken things cannot be fixed, but wounds heal. You healed, Delilah. You are one of the strongest people I have ever known." Delilah leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their grandchildren play. James's oldest son was teaching Beth's daughter how to braid a rope, their heads bent together in concentration. Daniel's twins were racing each other across the meadow, their laughter carrying on the wind. Sarah's youngest was asleep in the grass, peaceful as a lamb. "We made something good," she said. "Out of pain and fear and uncertainty, we made something beautiful." "We did," Isaac agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "And it will outlast us. Look at them, Delilah. Look at what we started." They sat together until the sun set, and the evening star appeared, content in the knowledge that their legacy was not just land or horses or money, but the family they had created and the love they had modeled for their children and grandchildren. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow as all years do. Mrs. Chen passed away in 1912 at the age of 78, and both Delilah and Isaac mourned the woman who had helped them when they needed it most. They established a scholarship in her name for students of Asian descent, wanting to honor her memory in a meaningful way. Mr. Thornton retired and moved to Spokane to live with his daughter, but he corresponded with Delilah regularly until his death in 1915. Thomas, their first employee, became ranch foreman and eventually a partner in the operation, his loyalty and skill earning him a stake in the business he had helped build. Isaac's health began to decline in his late 60s, the hard years of cowboy work catching up with him in the form of arthritis and a bad back. He could no longer work with the horses the way he once had, but he supervised and advised, his knowledge and experience invaluable. Delilah's eyesight weakened, making the detailed bookwork harder, but she adapted by working with Beth, teaching her daughter everything she knew about managing the business. They celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary in 1920, with all 4 children and their families gathered at the ranch. The property now encompassed over 1,000 acres and employed more than 30 people. The original cabin still stood, preserved as a reminder of where it all began, though Isaac and Delilah now lived in a larger house built nearby. During the celebration, James stood to offer a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the gathered family. "They built this ranch from nothing, but more importantly, they built a family based on love and respect and hard work. They taught us by example what it means to be good people, to honor your word, to treat others with kindness. Everything we are, we owe to them. There was not a dry eye in the house as everyone raised their glasses. That night, as Delilah and Isaac prepared for bed in their room, Isaac paused with his hand on the door. "You want it open or closed?" he asked, as he had asked thousands of times over the decades. Delilah smiled at him, this man who had given her safety and love and a life beyond her wildest dreams. "Closed," she said. "I want to sleep beside my husband with the door closed, knowing I am exactly where I want to be." Isaac closed the door and came to bed, pulling her into his arms. "I love you, Delilah Reynolds," he said, his voice soft in the darkness. "I love you too, Isaac Reynolds," she replied. "Thank you for keeping the door open all those nights until I did not need it anymore. Thank you for seeing what I needed and giving it without my having to ask." "Thank you for trusting me," Isaac said. "Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being the bravest person I have ever known." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before, and as they would do for the rest of their days together. Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1925, at the age of 72. He simply did not wake up one morning, his heart finally giving out after a lifetime of hard work and full living. Delilah woke beside him and knew immediately that he was gone. She lay there for a long time, holding his hand, telling him goodbye and thank you and I will see you again. The funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives Isaac had touched. Former employees, customers, neighbors, friends, all came to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his fairness, his skill, and his unwavering integrity. James delivered the eulogy, speaking about his father's strength and gentleness, his wisdom and his humility. Delilah thought she might fall apart after Isaac's death, but instead she found reserves of strength she had not known she possessed. She had learned from the best, after all. She continued to live in their house, surrounded by family and the land they had built together. She spent her days with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather, about the early days of the ranch, about love and courage and never giving up. She wrote in the journal Isaac had given her so many years ago, filling its pages, and then many more with memories and reflections and stories. Some of them were for her family, but some were just for herself, a way of processing grief and celebrating a life well lived. On warm evenings, she would sit on the porch and look out over the land, and she could almost feel Isaac beside her, his hand warm in hers, his voice low and steady as they planned their next project or simply enjoyed the sunset. She talked to him sometimes, telling him about the grandchildren's accomplishments and the ranch's successes, sharing her thoughts and fears and joys. Beth moved back to the ranch house to live with her mother after Isaac's death, bringing her husband and children with her. The house filled with life and noise and love, and while Delilah missed Isaac with an ache that never fully went away, she found comfort in family and purpose in helping raise another generation. She lived to see the ranch celebrate its 50th anniversary in 1933, during the depths of the Great Depression. The celebration was more modest than it would have been in better times, but it was no less meaningful. Delilah stood before her assembled family and employees, now in her 70s but still sharp and clear-eyed, and told them the story one more time. "Your grandfather and I started this ranch with nothing but a dream and a partnership built on mutual respect," she said. "We weathered droughts and fires, economic downturns and personal losses. We did it by working together, by treating each other and everyone we employed with fairness and kindness. That is the legacy I want you to carry forward, not just the land or the horses or the money, but the values. Respect." integrity, compassion. That is what makes us who we are. The family and employees erupted in applause, and Delilah smiled, feeling Isaac's presence as clearly as if he were standing beside her. She passed away in her sleep 2 years later in the spring of 1935 at the age of 73. She died in the bed she had shared with Isaac, surrounded by photographs of their life together, with the door closed because she had long ago conquered her fear and claimed her right to choose. Her funeral was as well attended as Isaac's had been, a testament to the woman she had become and the life she had lived. Beth spoke about her mother's courage and resilience, about the way she had transformed from a frightened young woman into a successful businesswoman, devoted mother, and beloved grandmother. "My mother taught us that our past does not define us," Beth said through her tears. "She taught us that we can overcome anything if we have the courage to try and the wisdom to accept help when it is offered. She taught us that love is not just a feeling but a choice we make every day through our actions." She and my father built something extraordinary together, and their legacy will continue through all of us. Delilah was buried beside Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the shade of pine trees, and with a view of the mountains they had both loved. The marker was simple, bearing their names and dates and the inscription, "They built a life together." The ranch continued under James's management and eventually passed to his children and grandchildren, remaining in the Reynolds family for generations. The original cabin was preserved and eventually opened as a small museum, telling the story of Isaac and Delilah and the partnership that had started it all. Visitors to the museum could see Delilah's journals, carefully preserved and transcribed, telling the story in her own words. They could see the silver brush that had been her mother's, the first ledger she had kept tracking expenses and income. They could see photographs of the young couple standing in front of their cabin, Isaac tall and serious, Delilah small and determined. But the most moving exhibit was a simple one, a photograph of the cabin's interior with one door standing open and another closed, and a placard explaining the significance of those doors. It told the story of a woman who had been terrified of closed doors, and a man who had understood and accommodated her fear, until she was strong enough to overcome it. It spoke of the patience and compassion that had defined their relationship, the mutual respect that had been the foundation of their success. The story of Isaac and Delilah Reynolds became part of local history, a tale told to school children and featured in books about the settlement of Washington State. But more than that, it became a lesson about love and healing, about the power of small gestures and consistent kindness, about building something lasting on a foundation of trust and partnership. Their great-great-grandchildren still worked the ranch well into the 21st century, still breeding quality horses, still treating employees and customers with the fairness and respect that Isaac and Delilah had established as core values. The land had been protected, placed under conservation easement to prevent development, ensuring that the sweeping meadows and pine forests would remain as they had been in 1883, when a cowboy and a frightened woman had first started building something beautiful together. And on quiet evenings when the wind whispered through the pines and the creek sang its eternal song, some claimed you could still feel their presence on the land they had loved, the ranch they had built, the home they had created from nothing more than courage and hope, and an open door that became a closed one when healing finally came. Their story was proof that sometimes the greatest love stories are not about grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but about the small daily choices to see another person's pain and respond with compassion, to build trust brick by brick, to create safety where there had been fear, and to transform survival into a life worth living. Isaac had seen a woman who needed help, and had offered it without expecting anything in return. Delilah had found the courage to accept that help and to believe in the possibility of something better. Together, they had created a legacy that extended far beyond themselves, touching generations of family and employees and community members who learned from their example that kindness matters, that respect is the foundation of love, and that healing is possible even from the deepest wounds. The open door had been a gift, a recognition of trauma and a gentle accommodation of need. The closed door had been a triumph, a reclamation of agency and a celebration of healing. Together, those doors told a story of transformation, of love that healed rather than hurt, of partnership that empowered rather than diminished. And in the end, that was the legacy of Delilah Carter Reynolds and Isaac Samuel Reynolds, two people who had found each other in a small frontier town in 1883 and had built something that would endure long after they were gone, a testament to the power of love rooted in respect, nurtured by kindness, and strengthened by the daily choice to honor and cherish each other through all the years of their lives together.